Hi, this is Eric Prystowsky, and welcome to another segment of EP on EP. It's a particular delight for me to have today a friend for many years and a wonderful researcher in our field, Dr. Sanjiv Narayan, who is a professor of medicine at Stanford. Sanjiv, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Eric. A pleasure.
So it'll come to no surprise to you to realize we're going to talk a little bit about rotors, since you have introduced the world to that. But what I'd like you to do is beyond that. So could you tell us about mapping the atrium for rotors, focal sites? Just kind of walk us through that, please.
Great. So, as I always say to our fellows, electrophysiology is about mapping. If you took everybody with an SVT, let's say due to a pathway, and you empirically ablated the lateral mitral isthmus, you'd get about 70% of accessory pathway mediated tachycardia. If you took people with other rhythms and let's say you assume there was a flutter and you always ablated just in the same portion of the cable tricuspid isthmus, you get a certain proportion. Maybe that's what we're doing wrong with AFib. By not mapping it, we're applying a standard approach and getting a ceiling of success rate. So I think mapping is key to anything we do. And I think that there's more and more work showing from multiple groups that AF is driven by localized regions. Some people call them rotors, some people call them rotational, localized reentries, and also, of course, there are focal sites. And I think that's key to our understanding of why different techniques do and don't work.
So let's follow through on that. The initial work came out that you had done. Our group got very much involved in it. We have still apply it for persistent. We actually just published our results. Our results are kind of in between. They're not as good as I think some of the results you've published and John Miller's published, and they're not nearly at the level of some of the other groups who I'll leave nameless. So there must be something. I mean, if you do a pulmonary vein isolation, it's a defined piece of anatomy, and either you're good or not very good at isolating it, but that's what you do, right? So that's a very defined technique. I'm getting the feeling, and I'd like you to elucidate on this from your years of work here, that there's more to this than just, I think that's it, I'm done, goodbye. Do you take maybe a little larger area? I mean, what are your thoughts on why there's discrepancy in the results?
I think it comes down to two or three things. Number one is how long you map for, and I think it's really important to map for long periods of time and get multiple positions of a basket or any mapping catheter. Number two, I think that it's an imperfect science or an art on actually reading AF maps, even in 2019. And then thirdly, I think the optimum approach to ablate these areas is still also evolving. So doing them one by one, as you know at the beginning, we used to put a basket catheter into one location and we got certain results. I think as we're looking at more complex patients, much bigger atria, uneven atria, the venous antra spread out and they're far from just an ovoid. We now move the basket routinely into 2 or 3 positions in the LA and 2 positions in the RA. So that's first. I think that helps a lot. We cover, if you look at our electroanatomic maps, which are superimposed, there's just a mesh, it's like a spider web of electrode locations. Secondly, we've actually been studying this network of drivers. I think that's a key concept. It's not just that there's a driver or 2 rotors. I think that these things are on and off at different times. I don't think they're meandering. I think they're in certain locations, but I think you have to look for longer periods.
So maybe one location may be predominant in a certain part, and then another location can take over versus a constant meandering.
Yes.
I see what you're saying. So has your experience been that if you target one of them, you'll see something that maybe you saw before now becomes the dominant area, then you have to go to that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and in an ideal case, you take out a dominant one and AF may terminate. That would be, a home run. But in fact, there could be other sites that weren't active at that moment. Another case, you might eliminate one and nothing happened. You think, boy, that was a dud. But in fact, there could be other sites driving. And of course, if you take those out, you're good. But if you don't map long enough, you could have a third scenario where, in fact, you've got other sites that aren't active even for longer periods of time. You have to map extensively to see them. We just published a paper last year where we showed that you can have 2 or 3 sites that are competing. And if you were looking at one area, it went away for tens of seconds. You could think that is a non-dominant rotor. We actually terminated AF at that site a few minutes later. In the interim, we tracked that by looking broadly, there was another site in the opposite end of the atrium that took over when that site became dominant, or when that site became dormant.
Yes.
And so only by looking at both did we see that there was this network. And that's what we're working more on. I think that's...
So you find, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but so you're maybe doing a little bit more.
Yeah.
I got you. So let's pivot from that to where you think things are going, because I know you're always doing new research. So what's on the horizon? What's our next step? What's your next step?
So there's actually, I think, reconciling all the different mapping approaches is one big challenge. And we're trying to do that. Many different groups have now shown localized driver sites with different names, and they're all showing a few similar characteristics. About 1/3 in the RA, 2/3 in the LA. That would explain what you said before, that ceiling of success by left atrial ablation. Why is it that those techniques are showing that similarity and yet they differ a bit in terms of how drivers are stable or not? So where you're applying multiple mapping techniques at once. Secondly, we're trying to understand this network using computational methods, and we're doing some AI to try and understand if there are patients where there are certain regions that are key or not. And I think a third area is, once you've identified the sites, how do you ablate them best?
Right.
We always just did a localized lesion set. Maybe that causes tachycardia in some patients. If you know there's scar, do you join a line between those areas? Do you always integrate a line if there's something in the middle of the RA that we often see on the lateral wall? Do you join up and down to the SVC and IVC? We currently don't, but those are strategies we have to test.
So wherever moving forward, I don't know if I want to get too much of this, but maybe you can give us a teaser. I've read some of your early results on mapping VF. Without going into a lot of details, are you continuing in that line of research?
We are. We're looking at patients who've just got VF and not VT to avoid, because obviously there are strategies for VT. The results are looking fantastic. It's a small number of patients. I think we're up to, 9 or 10.
So we're going to hold you there. Okay. Just a teaser, because by the next time we interview you again, you're going to have more patients, and we're going to talk about your new research in VF. How's that?
Great. That's our work with Dave Crumman. Thank you very much.
It's great to have you
Thanks,
here.
Eric.
Thanks, Sanjiv.
Appreciate it.